I remember the casket was small and her eyes were closed. I think one of her eyes was a little bit like droopy or something. I thought that was weird.
It's been nearly 3 decades since the unsolved murder of 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey, a case that captivated the nation. And even though her parents...
How did you feel seeing her?
A lot of sadness. I don't think I really fully grasped, like, after this I won't see her again.
JonBenet Ramsey's story is one of the most haunting and heartbreaking unsolved crimes in modern American history. On the surface, it was the tragic loss of a beautiful 6-year-old girl, found murdered in the basement of her own home the day after Christmas in 1996. But what followed was a media circus unlike anything most people had ever seen. The case wasn't just about a crime, it became a national obsession filled with mystery, suspicion, and controversy. The image of JonBenet in her pageant dresses, smiling brightly under the lights, quickly became one of the most recognizable and haunting photos of the 1990s. In the eyes of the public, she was more than just a child. She became a symbol of innocence stolen, of a case where truth was buried under public opinion and media hype. Now, after nearly 3 decades of silence, JonBenet's brother, Burke Ramsey, who was just 9 years old when his sister was found dead, has broken his silence. His decision to speak out has left people shocked, not just by what he said, but by what it reveals about the trauma, suspicion, and long shadow that has loomed over the Ramsey family for 28 long years. This isn't just the story of a crime, it's the story of a family that was forever changed, a mystery that refuses to be forgotten, and a young man finally finding the strength to speak after a lifetime of being accused, questioned, and misunderstood. At the time of JonBenet's death, the Ramsey family lived in Boulder, Colorado, wealthy, respected, and seemingly picture-perfect. Their home was large and elegant, and their daughter was already a local celebrity thanks to the beauty pageants she participated in. But the morning after Christmas, everything fell apart. Patsy Ramsey, JonBenet's mother, reportedly discovered a ransom note on the staircase claiming that her daughter had been kidnapped. The note was unusually long, over 2.5 pages, and demanded $118,000, an oddly specific amount that happened to match a recent work bonus John Ramsey, the father, had received. The police were called, and chaos ensued. But within hours, the nightmare deepened. JonBenet's lifeless body was found in the basement of the home. She had been strangled, suffered a fractured skull, and disturbingly, there were signs that she may have been sexually assaulted. Yet, there were no signs of forced entry. The ransom note, which investigators later found was written using paper from inside the house, raised even more questions. How could someone break into the home, commit such a gruesome crime, and then take the time to write a lengthy note without leaving any clear evidence? Suspicion didn't take long to turn inward. And at the center of that suspicion, along with her parents, was Burke Ramsey, a 9-year-old boy suddenly cast in the middle of a nightmare he couldn't possibly understand. Burke's name was rarely mentioned publicly in the early days of the investigation, but behind the scenes, he was already being questioned and watched closely. The idea that a 9-year-old could be responsible for his sister's death seemed unthinkable to many. But in a case with so few clear answers, every possibility was explored. Investigators reportedly considered the theory that Burke may have accidentally killed JonBenet during a fight or in a moment of childish frustration, and that the parents, fearing the consequences, covered it up. It's a theory that has circulated in media and online forums for years, fueled by rumors, leaks, and a growing sense that the truth was being hidden. What didn't help was Burke's quiet, almost withdrawn demeanor. He rarely spoke publicly and was kept out of the spotlight, protected by his parents as best they could. But the silence only fueled speculation. Why wasn't Burke talking? Why didn't he wake up during the chaos in the house? Why did he seem so calm in early interviews? These questions hung in the air unanswered, and over time, they hardened into public suspicion. The Ramsey family was relentlessly scrutinized. Every movement they made, every facial expression in interviews was dissected by the media. And for Burke, that meant growing up in the shadow of an accusation that was never proven but never entirely went away. It wasn't until many years later, in a now infamous interview with Dr. Phil in 2016, that Burke finally addressed the case publicly. At that time, he was a grown man in his late 20s, living a quiet life as a software engineer. The interview was emotional, uncomfortable, and at times, difficult to watch. Burke spoke about his sister, their childhood, and the morning of the tragedy. He recalled the funeral and how, as a child, he noticed something strange about JonBenet's eyes in the casket. He said it was a moment he would never forget. He also explained how confused and scared he felt during those early days, unsure of what had happened or why people were treating him differently. One thing that stood out in the interview was Burke's facial expressions. He smiled at times, which led some viewers to question his sincerity. But behavioral experts later explained that this was likely a nervous reaction, a coping mechanism common in people discussing traumatic experiences. Still, the damage was done. Some people saw the interview as suspicious, reinforcing old theories. Others saw it as a long overdue chance for Burke to clear the air. For Burke himself, it was a chance to finally speak his truth after years of being misrepresented and misunderstood. He denied any involvement in his sister's death and explained that he had stayed in bed that night, confused and afraid, unsure of what was happening. He said he trusted his parents to handle it, never imagining the nightmare that would unfold. As the interview aired and public attention once again turned to the Ramsey family, the spotlight shifted to John Ramsey, JonBenet's father. Unlike Burke, John had spoken publicly over the years, always insisting on the family's innocence and criticizing the investigation for its early mistakes. In interviews, John painted a picture of a family not only shattered by grief but hunted by public opinion. He described how even routine trips to the grocery store would end in pain, like the time young Burke broke down in tears after seeing a tabloid accusing him of murder. John was particularly critical of how the Boulder police handled the case, claiming they focused too early on the family and ignored other potential leads. He said that instead of seeking justice, the investigators sought closure by blaming those closest to the victim. That tunnel vision, in his view, was the biggest reason the case remains unsolved. Over the years, John has continued to push for a renewed investigation, calling for independent experts, better technology, and fresh eyes on the case. He firmly believes that the real perpetrator has never been caught, and that mistakes made in the early hours of the investigation cost the case its best chance at being solved. And perhaps most tragically, he believes those mistakes also cost his wife Patsy her peace. Patsy Ramsey died of ovarian cancer in 2006, never seeing justice for her daughter and never fully escaping the shadow of suspicion that hung over her for a decade. Today, more than 28 years later, the case of JonBenet Ramsey remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in America. Despite multiple theories, media specials, books, documentaries, and reinvestigations, no one has ever been arrested or charged. DNA evidence has been retested using more advanced technology, but still no conclusive link has been found. The Boulder Police Department insists the case remains open and active, but many experts and the Ramsey family believe not enough is being done. As time passes, memories fade, witnesses grow older, and the chances of a breakthrough seem to grow smaller. And yet the public remains fascinated. Perhaps because this story represents so many layers of tragedy: the loss of a child, the suspicion cast on a grieving family, the media frenzy, the unanswered questions. And now Burke Ramsey's decision to speak out adds a new layer, one that forces people to reconsider what they thought they knew. After nearly 3 decades, his words offer insight into the lasting trauma that comes from being caught in the center of a national mystery. They reveal a young man who has lived most of his life under suspicion, trying to move forward while never being fully free of the past. They also raise questions about how we treat people caught in the media spotlight, especially children. In some ways, Burke is not just JonBenet's brother. He's another victim of this tragedy, forced to live in the long, cold shadow of a case that refuses to let go. And yet through it all, John Ramsey continues to fight. His mission is simple: justice for JonBenet. Not revenge, not closure for the family's reputation, but justice for a little girl whose life was stolen far too soon. He believes that with the right attention, the right resources, and the right people, this case can still be solved. He's called for more transparency, for new investigators, for outside experts to be brought in. He's asked for the public's help in keeping the case alive, not just in memory but in action. Because what haunts him more than anything is the idea that the person who did this is still out there walking free. For John, this isn't just about his daughter. It's about every child, every family, and every person who believes in justice. It's about preventing another tragedy and holding on to the hope that even after all this time, the truth can still come to light. In a world where stories often fade and names are forgotten, JonBenet Ramsey's story still matters, not because of the headlines but because behind them was a real child, a real family, and a real loss. And now, as Burke steps forward with his truth and John continues his search for justice, we are all reminded that some stories are worth remembering, no matter how much time has passed. Because justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied. It's been 28 years since the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, a name that still haunts the American public. She was just 6 years old when her lifeless body was found in the basement of her family's Boulder, Colorado home on December 26, 1996. What began as a missing persons report rapidly turned into one of the most notorious unsolved cases in U.S. history. For decades, media speculation and tabloid gossip have clouded the search for the truth. And while the public has heard endless theories about what happened that night, there's been one voice that remained largely silent: JonBenet's older brother, Burke. But now, nearly 3 decades later, Burke Ramsey is beginning to speak out, quietly, carefully, and with a heavy burden still on his shoulders. His silence wasn't from guilt, as some have cruelly suggested. It was from trauma, grief, and a desperate need to preserve what little normalcy he could salvage from a life that was shattered at the age of 9. Imagine losing your baby sister in such a horrifying way, then being paraded through headlines as a suspect before you were even old enough to fully understand what was happening. That's what Burke faced. For years, he stayed out of the spotlight, refusing to do interviews, resisting the urge to publicly defend himself against accusations that would have broken most adults. But now, through legal filings, public statements, and rare interviews, he's beginning to share what life has been like for the only remaining child of John and Patsy Ramsey. Burke says he's still trying to make sense of that night, still grappling with questions he may never have answers to. The media frenzy, the whispers at school, the surveillance vans parked outside his home, it all became part of his childhood. And instead of receiving support as a victim of a tragedy, he was treated as a suspect, grilled by police, dissected by journalists, and turned into a subject of conspiracy theories. The emotional toll has been enormous, not just on him, but on his entire family. His father, John Ramsey, remarried years after Patsy died from cancer. But even his second marriage couldn't escape the long shadow of JonBenet's case. John's new wife, Jan, recalled being horrified when paparazzi ambushed them on their honeymoon, splashing their faces across magazines as if they were celebrities, not grieving family members trying to rebuild their lives. Through it all, John never gave up on seeking justice for JonBenet, and neither has Burke. But their path hasn't been easy. One of the most crucial turning points in this long and tangled story came when a retired detective named Lou Smith joined the investigation. Lou wasn't like the others. He didn't walk in with assumptions or pressure to close the case quickly. He brought experience, objectivity, and an unshakable belief in facts over theory. Lou Smith had already solved over 200 homicide cases, including many that had gone cold, and he had a reputation for uncovering truths others had missed. When he was brought onto the JonBenet Ramsey case, he immediately realized something didn't add up with the official narrative that the family was involved. Most of the Boulder Police Department was convinced that the Ramseys or someone in the home were responsible, but Lou Smith saw signs of a break-in, indicators of an intruder, and forensic details that just didn't align with an inside job. He believed, and loudly asserted, that someone outside the family had entered the house that night with the intention to kidnap JonBenet, but something went terribly wrong. The evidence supported his theory: a scuff mark on the wall beneath the basement window, a suitcase placed suspiciously under the same window, and unidentified male DNA found on JonBenet's clothing. But instead of being encouraged to follow this lead, Lou was stonewalled by his own colleagues. Bolder detectives mocked his findings, dismissed his analysis, and ultimately made him feel unwelcome. Disheartened but not defeated, Lou resigned from the official investigation after just a year. Yet he didn't stop fighting. He continued working independently, keeping in touch with the Ramsey family and compiling an enormous archive of information that would become the foundation of a new theory about the case. Before his death in 2010, Lou created a list of potential suspects, people the police had never seriously looked into. He handed that list and his mission to his daughter, Cindy. Cindy has since taken up the mantle, determined to finish what her father started. She's been collecting DNA samples from the names on that list, hoping that advancements in forensic science will finally close the chapter her father worked so hard to write. She has said publicly that her father gave her very specific instructions: where to begin, who to trust, and why he believed they were getting closer to the truth. Her efforts have been quiet, meticulous, and persistent, all aimed at one goal: solving JonBenet's murder and clearing the fog of speculation that has hung over the Ramsey family for so long. As of now, one of the biggest roadblocks to closure remains access to a critical piece of evidence: the unidentified male DNA found on JonBenet's clothing. John Ramsey has made multiple requests to the Colorado governor asking for permission to have this DNA independently tested using the latest genealogical technology. But those requests have gone unanswered. Without that green light, the DNA sits in a storage facility, potentially holding the key to a crime that has baffled investigators for nearly 3 decades. John believes that the future of this case lies not in rumors, not in rehashing old interviews, but in science, hard data, DNA, and tools that simply didn't exist back in 1996. He's not interested in pointing fingers or playing media games. He just wants the truth. He says he'll keep pushing for answers until his last breath. But in more vulnerable moments, he admits there's a part of him that doubts the case will ever be solved. The years have been long, and the pain has been unrelenting. In one emotional interview, when asked what he thinks about when JonBenet comes to mind, John's voice cracked. He didn't talk about theories or suspects. He didn't mention court battles or media coverage. He said that if he could say one thing to his daughter, it would be that he's sorry. Sorry he couldn't protect her. That was his job, and he failed. It's a heartbreaking admission from a father who has lived in the shadow of that one moment for the better part of his life. But he also said she was loved. Loved more than anything in the world. And that he believes deep down they will be reunited one day. That hope is what sustains him. For Burke, the scars are quieter but just as deep. He has lived most of his life in a strange limbo, part of a famous case but always outside the narrative. Now, as he begins to speak up, he's not looking for sympathy or fame. He just wants people to understand that he was a child too. An innocent, traumatized boy whose life was forever changed. As he puts more of his voice into the public conversation, the world is finally beginning to listen. And maybe, just maybe, the truth will come out, not from wild theories or endless TV specials, but from the people who've lived this nightmare and never stopped believing that JonBenet deserves justice. If you've made it this far, thank you for caring about her story. Please like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories that go beyond the headlines, and click the next video shown on your screen too.